Welcome to Alignment, using your values to invest in social change, brought to you by Oikocredit US and Oikocredit Canada. We're proud to bring you this 10th in our series of interviews with thought leaders in the field of values-based investing. I'm Matt Eldridge, CEO of Oikocredit US. Today, we're delighted to have as our special guest Morgan Simon, founding partner at Candide Group, an impact investing firm that directs capital away from an extractive global economy to one built upon values of social justice and sustainability. The firm works with families, foundations, athletes, and cultural influencers who want their money to work for justice. How does the Candide Group help clients align investments with their values? Stay tuned to find out more. Before I introduce Morgan, just a quick word about who we are. Oikocredit US is the nonprofit US affiliate of Oikocredit International, a 46-year-old global cooperative that works to improve living conditions in low-income countries. Oikocredit does so by investing in small and medium-sized enterprises in those areas in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. Our job here at Oikocredit US is to raise awareness and financial support in North America for these efforts. I'm happy today to speak with Morgan. She's worked in the impact investing field over the past 2 decades. Among other notable roles, Morgan has been founding CEO at the global impact investing network Tonic and a board member at The Working World, an investment fund for community-based cooperative enterprises. Morgan earned a BA from Swarthmore and a certified private wealth advisor credential from Yale School of Management. Morgan, thanks for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here today.
All right. First of all, great to meet you, Morgan. The concentric circles are a little uncanny. LinkedIn says we both know 89 folks in common. We were both political science majors, although you doubled in economics, and worked in voter registration early in our careers. And we both studied at Yale School of Management. Most importantly, though, I'm struck by your professional journey. On a personal level, Morgan, what drives you? What's inspired you to work toward a more just world, as we like to say here at Oikocredit?
I would say, Matt, that it's the combination of love and empathy, that you have to feel like there's a world worth enjoying, a world worth saving, a world worth being a part of, to want to do this work. And that's part of why, as much as I spend a lot of my life and my passion on my investment career, I have a dance career. I'm an active outdoors person. I'm very much living in the world every day, and I love it. And I think that that's part of why when you marry that love with empathy, which is the idea of I want everybody in the world to have access to the things that bring them joy, that's my motivation. And often feeling like economic autonomy is at the root of so many other types of autonomy, whether that's political or cultural, just the way that you get to choose to live your life if you have those economic choices is so massive. So for me, that's where the rubber hits the road in my strong desire to have beautiful experiences for myself and to feel like others on the planet equally have access to whatever experiences bring them the most joy.
Thanks, Morgan. You've been working in the impact investing space for some time now. And why did you decide to co-found the Candide Group back in 2013?
I would say that it's been a lifelong journey of just really trying to deepen my personal impact and find my role within it. That I had started off doing more traditional kind of charitable work, and it also worked for the UN in Honduras and kind of traditional aid settings, and pretty quickly grew frustrated with the way that was cementing global society into haves or have-nots, that you needed to have people be poor in order for you to get paid to help them, right? Always felt a little funny to me. And as I started to look at the intersectionality of systems, that you couldn't fix housing if you didn't also fix education, if you didn't also fix labor rights, the economy as a fundamental organizing point for that seemed really critical. And that's why when I was back in undergrad at Swarthmore, I started filing shareholder resolutions as a 19-year-old, right? That's why I'm able to say with a straight face that I've been in this field for 2 decades, because I started really young. And I think with that passion of saying, I don't think I'm ever going to be a billionaire again. I mean, I still have some time left, but I'm at this school that has $1 billion endowment. Let me start acting like one and see how I can leverage that as influence. And in being successful with our first couple shareholder campaigns, taught me at a really young age the power of investing as a tool. And that's what really led me to dive very deeply into impact investing in founding the Responsible Endowments Coalition. And what's interesting, one of 5 co-founders in the case of both organizations. It always takes a community, right, for anything that we do. But I was the founding executive director for the Responsible Endowments Coalition, working with over 100 college campuses across the country. And then the founding CEO of Tonic, this network of global impact investors that's still around today. And within that, often what we had been doing was really just encouraging people to do impact investing, whatever way made the most sense to them. And I started, coming from my kind of specific social justice and organizing background, wanting to be more specific in thinking about how can we use impact investing in a really non-extractive way. How can we make sure that we are, quite literally always adding more value than we're extracting in any relationship, and as much as possible supporting community-driven change rather than being wealth holders deciding what the world is supposed to look like. So that was part of the impetus for me in co-founding Candide Group with Anair Ben-Ami, and working with an initial family to move their assets from 0 to 100% impact, to then expanding to be a registered investment advisor, working with multiple individuals and foundations, always with that strong core of that commitment of wanting their money to work for justice.
That's really helpful to understand, and so interesting too that your very first client, you were able to help move from 0 to 100% impact. You talk about, your website talks about a core focus of the Candide Group being around social justice. And how would you say you've helped your clients invest for social justice? And does this look differently if your client is an individual versus, say, a foundation?
Sure. I think that for both individuals and foundations, the starting place is being really conscious of how much money do you need. So in the case of foundations, that can be the kind of traditional endowment model of the 5% payout a year plus 3% for operating. You're kind of trying to get to a more or less consistent 8%. And note that doesn't mean that I'm necessarily trying to shoot the highest number possible. I'm trying to create the most consistent number and reduce risk, right? And that can feel very different than the kind of traditional capitalist assumptions of more is always better, right? And even if sometimes we wind up taking outsized risk in a way that's not really appropriate. And then similarly for individuals, I might work with some first generation wealth holders where they absolutely, the first to go to their college, the first to really be able to provide something for their children, they do want to make sure that they're growing their assets. And others who say, here by the grace of God go I, that I inherited money, and that I feel differently about the origins of it. Maybe I'm ready to move from more of a reparations framework in terms of how do I make sure that those dollars get really deeply back into communities and allow people to take the type of risks that they don't get to do if they don't have that rich uncle waiting in the background or auntie. So I think with that, we always start with what's the particular financial reality of that person or institution and their desires for what their money is doing in the world, and then be able to pair that with knowledge from the grassroots of what is it that communities are really asking for. And sometimes that can mean supporting institutions where community members are actually making the choices about how money is going to be deployed. It means within our own structures. So we currently lead a fund called Olamina, focused on community development, U.S. community development, and are in the process of launching a climate justice fund. In the case of both of those, we have community advisory boards. In the case of Olamina, or in both actually in our current construction, both are 100% women of color who are making decisions about where capital is getting to be allocated as part of the broader investment committee. So there's an element there of really sometimes seeing what's our right role in the process, depending on our particular identity and historical reality. And of the over 100 investments we've made, just over 75% of those are into women and people of color led organizations. Last year, the majority of those Black and Indigenous led. So that's been very much central to our practice. And then our team as well is majority women and people of color. So I think those are some of the pieces that as we shift who gets to be allocators of capital, that has a real social justice implication. And as we start to think a bit more critically about not just more is always better, but more at what cost, right? And at what point am I willing to say, this is what I need, and I want to be really thoughtful about how I'm showing up in the world.
Morgan, we here at Oikocredit US conducted a market study recently that found that interest in impact investing in the US is growing exponentially. Are you seeing a rising interest among your clients to align their investments with their values? And if so, can you share some examples?
Sure. So my investors in general are already, all in on impact investing, right? So because otherwise they're unlikely to seek me out, if that's not their strong desire. And often it can be because they're already working with an impact manager, but that they're looking for something specific in the private asset space. That's really where we tend to focus. Private equity, private debt, venture funds, direct investments, where a lot of larger managers won't touch direct investments at all, or they'll have criteria that they're not going to invest in funds with less than 50 million under management and 10 years in the business. And we're like, well, that's a really great way to exclude the vast majority of women and people of color. And we don't feel good about that. So let's be more creative in our underwriting methodology. Let's perhaps have to put in more labor to get that done, but see that as a really critical component of shifting who is going to ultimately be the allocators of capital. So that's some of the practices that we think about with our clients in terms of how we're continuing to drive impact forward, whether it's that, as I mentioned in that first instance, of helping someone go from 0 to 100% and create the manager suite they need to do that, or where they might come to us and say, help me put 10 million into managers of color, or help me put X amount into climate justice. And we're able to build a more custom portfolio. So if anything, I would say our role in the ecosystem has been about really deepening that work. And I'm grateful. I think the broader conversations, there's increasing interest and skepticism, I would say, particularly in ESG and sort of what's happening on the public market side. And a really great piece recently in The Intercept about the inclusion of some private prison companies into ESG funds, and why would that be, right? And that essentially you really do need to be a conscious consumer of impact investing in the same way that those of us at a certain income level that get to make this choice. But I'm guessing, Matt, when you go into the egg aisle and there's, the fair trade versus the pasture raised versus the fair trade organic versus the this, that, and the other, I guess it's less often fair trade. But the point being, there's a lot of labels and they're confusing, right? But eventually you kind of make this decision for your family, which is, okay, we really like those more yellow yolks and we're willing to pay the extra $1 for them, or like whatever it might be, right? I think in that same way, we have to learn to really differentiate between different types of impact investment if we want to get deeply into the impacts that we seek.
That's a useful analogy to think about. And again, it's just great to hear about sort of the efforts you're making to seek out and find ways to prioritize diversity and equity and inclusion in what sounds like all aspects of your work. As you work with clients to invest in impact, what are some of the biggest challenges that you and they face? And, I guess if you can say, have you had any investments go not according to plan?
Sure. I mean, my biggest challenge is that I, get to see and talk to maybe 500 entrepreneurs and fund managers a year. And I just wish that everybody could get more money, because there's so many amazing things that are happening in the world, and thrilled to say that there's no lack of pipeline in impact investing. That when you're seeking to do an impact approach across 100% of a portfolio, you don't have to worry of, is there going to be enough product in XYZ? Like, there is product. And that is great. And then in terms of investment outcomes, without being overly Pollyanna, I want to note that sometimes, we hear some of the venture funds we talk to think about this way as well. If you don't have any quote unquote failures, you're probably not taking as much risk as you should. And that particularly when we're talking about new approaches to social change, there's going to have to be risk involved, because that's how you do new things. And basically going back to what I'd mentioned with a particular client, there's going to be different pools of money that are able to take on different levels of risk, right? That it's pretty typical that a family might have a trust, a foundation, a retirement fund, a DAF. Different vehicles can do different things. So let's just be really clear on the types of risks that we want to take and why. So for instance, one of the projects we've invested in is a community-led space in a historic Black neighborhood in Oakland, where they're having committee councils come together to decide how this historic jazz club is going to be used, and in a variety of cultural ways and other opportunities. When we talk about questions like when exactly will we get our return back, well, we have to see first what the community decides on what they want to build, right? And that means that from a financial perspective, it's a different sort of pro forma, and that's a different risk profile. And it's not to say that it's a success or a failure if it pays back in 5 years. It's performing the way that it's supposed to, right? So I think that's where, rather than having one criteria for success, and we certainly have portfolios as well, I can say on the other side, that are still 100% impact, that are designed and executing on beating benchmarks, right? So I think that's where just being really clear on what the objective is and trying to hit that or not. And then times when, if we use the kind of classic definition of failure, right? Belly up, company no longer exists in the world. What we really try to be thoughtful about from the outset is two things. How is that innovation going to contribute to future business models? That, for instance, if you had only had one computer manufacturer and said, oh, well, that one failed, I guess we're done with computers, right? Like Midyard did a great report on the idea of you need to kind of create multiple products on the shelf to create the shelf for any type of social innovation that you might have. So how do you make sure in that failure moment, the company doesn't just go away quietly into the night, but are they going to publicly share out some of the lessons learned to be able to contribute? I think that's really important, and that's part of failing forward as an industry or as a social change sector, right? They might have figured out some new regulatory elements of fintech or whatever it might be to be able to share that. And then the second criteria, depending on going back to the financial purpose of the assets. If those assets were needed for living expenses or to make a payout by a foundation and you lost that money, that is an abject loss, right? And a tragedy in terms of what that money will no longer be able to do in the world. If, for instance, it was philanthropic resources like a DAF, where let's say that I'm going to write a 50K check to a food bank, and that's going to feed 2,000 people. Or I invest in a social enterprise that's trying to bring low-cost food distribution, and they take my $50,000 and they go ahead and get healthy meals out to 50,000 people, and then they fold in 5 years. Is that a success or is that a failure, right? It depends on what was your essentially opportunity cost for that money and what you needed it to do for its portfolio. So I know it's kind of funny. I've always walked this line in saying, look, impact investment has the potential to fulfill very traditional financial goals if you want to go down that path. It's not saying that you're going to lose your money. And there's other times where you absolutely want to take great risk of losing your money because you want to make sure that society is able to progress and that you're going to be part of that. So that's where it's really, for me, about intentionality. It's about this question of what are the intended returns, as opposed to saying that it's always maximizing return, or thinking about it as a basket of values that you're trying to achieve through that return. So that also impacts the basket of values we think about in the context of failure.
Morgan, you spoke earlier about leading with love and empathy. What inspires you the most about the difference you've been able to help make in people's lives?
I think part of my freezing a little of that question is I often feel like it's the entrepreneurs that are making the differences, and we are just kind of this like source of jet fuel. And that it's rare that I actually get to feel like I'm the one making the impact. I would say that I'm proud of the instances where I've been able to really be an organizer within the impact investment space, because if it's just about us deploying, Candide in our private asset practice, we've done, I think, just over like 170 million. that's a nice number, but it's nothing compared to the 3 trillion or whatever it might be circulating in the global economy every day. So that's where this piece around educating, inspiring, creating systems like Tonic that make it easier for people to jump in, pushing the college and university system and the 300 billion that they manage. It's probably much more than that now, but when I was doing it 20 years ago, that's been part of it, of thinking, let's not just, build our own little perfect portfolio, but really think about how we shift practices. And then the other body of work that I'm proud about for Candide Group has been how we're able to partner with social movements. The understanding that finance is a tool for change that's often poorly understood or can be very intimidating. And to give an example of then how we've been able to support social movements as they try to figure this stuff out. We intentionally, back in the day when Candide had an office, had co-located our office with a number of activist groups in Oakland. So it was the Center for Cultural Power, Fabian Rodriguez's organization, Presente.org, 350.org, like a bunch of us all in the same space. And part of it was to really kind of diversify our lunch cooler conversation, right? To get out of the investment field and hear more what was going on the ground. And there was once where Matt Nelson, the executive director at Presente, which is the largest online organizing network for progressive Latinos, stepped into my office and said, "Hey, Morgan, we're at the height of the family separation crisis. This is back in 2018. We think banks are making money off of this, but we don't really know how. Can you help us figure this out?" And we then became kind of leading members in the Families Belong Together Coalition, which was this massive coalition, over 100 organizations across the country, that worked to get close to 90% of the banks that have been financing the private prisons that were detaining these families to pull their money out, or to commit to pulling their money out. And that wound up being a grassroots movement of over 500,000 people across the country, mostly moms, who came together to say, I don't want my money in the bank that's supposed to grow for my family to help lock up someone else's family. So that's the sort of work where I think, beyond just thinking about our work with high net worth people, that people of any wealth level, we're all accidental billionaires. We're all connected to money one way or another, whether it's through our alma mater, through our banking relationship, whatever it might be. And helping people learn how to leverage that power is something that we're really excited about. And it keeps us in relationship with people in a way that I think is very helpful for our investment practice. That when we're evaluating the impact of something, it's not just kind of ruminating on what this might, impact people, but it's being able to talk to people directly and to really get that insight from the ground. So that's to say, I'm proud of the impact we were able to have in that case, and really highlighting the money being made off of immigrant detention. And in general, the opportunity for us to not only be impactful through our investments, but through the ripple effect that being aware of just where your money spends the night can have on society.
Well, Morgan, it's personally motivating to me to hear more about both how you've directly had a contribution to making a difference, and then also, like you say, have added jet fuel to those entrepreneurs who in turn are making a difference on the ground. And as you said, at a high level, you've helped move more than 170 million into impactful investments around the world over the past decade. As you look ahead, what are your hopes and dreams for what impact Candide Group can help clients achieve in the next decade?
I'm really excited leaning into more community-driven structures and decision-making, and the idea that we can, with something like Olamina, which is a $40 million fund, and on the climate justice side, we are aspiring to raise 100. The idea that you can have substantial resources where community members are getting a real vote in that process, because there's a point where I start to feel uncomfortable in the context of, I certainly am proud of my diligence abilities and ability to get to know companies and funds. But at the end of the day, should I, a single white woman sitting in Oakland, get to have that much power over deciding what's going to happen in the world? And the extent to which we're able to broaden that decision-making, I think is really critical. And that a number of our clients really feel similarly. They certainly, want things that are aligned with their interests, but they also recognize maybe that, birth or luck should not be the reason that we get to decide exclusively how resources are allocated in society. So I've been seeing more interest in that in the funder community, and that's true on the philanthropic side as well, where you see different types of community integration into foundation boards or community foundations. And I think the extent to which we can do that through investing is very powerful. I'm also excited as we continue to fund, so many things. That's why I'm struggling to pick. That the new models that we're seeing for just investment itself and the way that can help to spread ownership out over a greater number of players, looking at models of whether co-ops or community ownership or ESOPs and new funds that are cropping up around those theses. And then a number of funds that are also really just focused on making sure that diverse entrepreneurs get the same chances that others do. So the climate bill, and some of the opportunities that's opening up, that's creating some great opportunities for our companies right now. We've done a lot of work in solar and different community models of energy. So it feels like a good time. It feels like a good time to be doing this work. And to just continue to find great opportunities to help people, really put their money where their values are.
That's great to hear, Morgan, not least of which because Oikocredit is a member-owned cooperative and spends quite a bit of effort in helping to bolster the cooperative movement around the world. So great to hear you're looking into those and finding ways to utilize those types of governance and structures. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you all very much for tuning in. And thank you, Morgan, for joining us in this series of interviews we're calling Alignment, Using Your Values to Invest in Social Change. Please join us for our next interview in the Alignment series. Alignment is made possible by generous donations from people like you. You can also invest in Oikocredit's impact through our recoverable grant program. If you'd like to learn more about Candide Group, visit candidegroup.com. That's CANDIDE group.com. For more about Oikocredit Canada or Oikocredit US, or how to support our mission to improve living standards in low-income countries, visit our websites at oikocredit.ca or oikocreditus.org. Until next time, on behalf of everyone at Oikocredit in North America, thanks for your support. See you soon.